So the term simulation game represents a very broad array of different kinds of games. Today I'm focusing on the more cozy games, starting off with Animal Crossing. Obviously everybody fell in love with this game over the lockdown period. I personally did, and I'd say it's probably the biggest simulation game considering that it's come out by Nintendo. As many of you know, it's one of the most popular games released on the Switch. I think Mario Kart 8 is the biggest game on the Switch technically, but Animal Crossing is like second place. I think the interesting thing about Animal Crossing is it doesn't try to be any more than what it is. I think a lot of simulation games run the risk of trying to be too much. They release a million DLC packs and add all this stuff to it, whereas Animal Crossing I feel like just keeps it quite basic. And with New Horizons, they took the series in a slightly different direction by putting you on an island, but that slightly different direction made a really big difference to the gameplay, but in a way that felt natural, and it still just felt like the vanilla Animal Crossing that a lot of people love. I do admit, like, I do get a little bit bored playing it after a while. See, I'm the kind of person that will play Animal Crossing like non-stop for about 2 months, and then I get bored of it, and then I don't play it again for about a year, and then I pick it up again and I start a whole new island and I start all over again. But I feel like that's the fun with Animal Crossing. It's nice starting off with nothing and having to work your way up and actually work on your island to make it look nice. I will say, compared to previous Animal Crossing games, New Horizons did take that annoying Minecraft trope of having to craft everything, and it did make crafting quite mundane, I'm not gonna lie, but it does feel like there's an endless amount of things to do. We are starting off strong by putting this one as a must buy. Looking at City Skylines, many people say SimCity walks so City Skylines could run, although I do slightly agree. I will say they are both entirely separate experiences. Like, you could play the SimCity reboot game now from EA, that tragic remake version. By the way, it's not as tragic anymore. It is actually moderately playable, but I do feel like they are entirely separate things. One thing that I do really love about City Skylines is that it gives you a real essence of realism. Whenever I play the game, I always try and build a real city. It never ever works out well. It never does when you try and build a real place, but I just feel like it's one of those games that gives you a lot of creative freedom to just put your head in and actually enjoy working on a city project. Saying that, every single time I boot the game, I do start an entirely new city. I do think the game though does have some flaws, I'm not gonna lie. I do think some of the DLCs released for the game are quite questionable. Yes, I'm looking at you, Snowfall. And also one of the more recently released ones, like the airport DLC. Why am I gonna buy DLC to make some nice airports? Like, I'm sorry, but what on earth was that about? Having said that though, the game on sale is very cheap with the DLC, and it allows you to do a lot of cool things. And the great thing is they do update the game a lot with free updates every now and then. Even though it's been out for many years now, they're still working on it and they're still making it a really fun game to play and always exploring new ideas. But for me, it just takes the full essence of what a simulation game should be, which is just something fun to mess around with. If you're into city builders, I would say it's a fun game. So looking at PlanetCoaster and PlanetZoo, starting off with PlanetCoaster, again, a lot of people say Roller Coaster Tycoon walks so PlanetCoaster could run. I actually totally disagree with this. I actually really enjoy PlanetCoaster. I like doing the scenario mode more than sandbox modes. So this is gonna really surprise you, but I actually really don't like PlanetCoaster all that much. Don't get me wrong, it's a really fun game. I just find it so overwhelming. Like, if I'm being brutally honest, I do feel a little bit stressed playing the game because there's just so much to do. I feel like a lot of simulation games, for example, like City Skylines, will give you the option to do it the easy way, but they also give you the option to do it the hard way. Whereas PlanetCoaster is just like, you've only got it the hard way and there's no easy way to go about it. I would say the biggest barrier for me is actually building nice things, because you can't just build a shop. You've actually got to like individually place down all of these different assets and rotate them in different ways and learn a million different keyboard shortcuts. And good for you if you like that kind of stuff, but for me personally, I just find it so overwhelming. And I know you can find blueprints on the Steam library, but again, like, I don't want to have to deal with the chore of looking through all of these blueprints and find that maybe it uses an asset from a piece of DLC I don't own or something. Same with building roller coasters. Sometimes I just don't find it a fun challenge in the game because it can be quite overwhelming with all the assets you have to use to make it look decorative. I'm sorry, PlanetCoaster, I do love you, but you are just mediocre if you must. Looking at PlanetZoo, I will say PlanetZoo is quite quite similar in that it can be quite overwhelming having to design a lot of things. But one of the biggest difference between PlanetCoaster and PlanetZoo is that in PlanetZoo, there's a lot less building things from individual assets. And that's because it's more about building the park enclosures, which I feel like can be a lot more fun and a lot more creative and a lot easier. And when I say easier, I mean it's easy in that you can do it in a way that feels challenging. I feel challenged when I have to build a nice enclosure, but it doesn't feel like I have to be a digital art designer in order to pull it off. I feel like I, as a non-expert, can do it, and that's why I like it. Whereas PlanetCoaster, I feel like, has this more elaborate, uncapped approach to doing everything that you want. PlanetZoo seems more to be about constraints and doing things in a restricted way, which I believe harnesses more creativity than being able to do anything, because when you have constraints, you have to work within some guidelines, and it just feels a lot more challenging. And there's so many different factors that you have to think about when making enclosures, not only just fulfilling the needs of the animals, but also the guests too, but also trying to go about it in a way that doesn't make you feel like a cash grabby zoo and you're actually doing something nice for animal welfare. I do think real life zoos are animal cruelty. You can fight me on that one, but I do. So I put this one just a bit above PlanetCoaster. I'd say it's fun. So I feel like not many people know about My Time at Portia. I feel like a lot of people have heard of it, but they've never really played it or know what it's about. It's kind of like a cross between a farming simulation game and Minecraft, but it's also got some RPG, like JRPG elements as well. It's basically set in like a post-apocalyptic society, and you have to rebuild the world and make it look nicer, but you also have to visit abandoned ruins so you can fight monsters and collect relics and more materials and things. It has all of the main elements of like a farming simulator game, so you can romance, for example, with a lot of the other villagers, but it does also feel a little bit like a JRPG in that you have to go into some of these areas, like dungeons, and actually fighting enemies. And the thing I love about it is that it has missions, which I know is a very small thing, but in like more creative simulation games, you don't really see that. When you think of other games like farming simulators, for example, like Stardew Valley or Story of Seasons, you basically have free reign to do anything that you want, which is fine, which is nice. But with My Time at Portia, you actually have quests to fulfill. You have like a main quest line and you have side quests. So it kind of takes like that JRPG style and puts it into like a simulation box. It's like merged them both together. And I think that's why I really like it, because we've never really seen anything like that before. Don't get me wrong, the game does have a lot of flaws, like a lot. It is quite buggy. I wouldn't say the graphics is that overwhelming, and it doesn't always go far enough with a lot of its features. They are releasing a sequel to it, My Time at Sandrock, which is basically a newer version of it, and it gives it a lot of quality of life improvements. I can't really review that game now because it's simply not released yet, but they seem to have had a look of a lot of the issues with My Time at Portia, and they seem to be changing it. So I'm really hoping that they do improve on My Time at Portia. But for what it's worth, I'd say it's a fun thing to mess around with, but I personally wouldn't go out my way to get it, especially compared to all of the other games. Maybe if you can afford it and you have the time to spend. So I'd just say if you must. Taking a look at Stardew Valley, whereas games like Story of Seasons usually try to appeal to a younger audience, Stardew Valley I feel like has enough complexity to make it feel like it's more geared toward an older audience. And I personally feel like simulation games like this are enjoyed more by an older audience than a younger audience. I also really like the overarching storyline of the Jojo Mart versus the community center. I think it's a really nice touch which really helps sell the game. And the funny thing is, like, it's not the biggest budget game in the world. Like, the graphics is bad, but literally nobody cares because it's just a fun, quirky game. And I feel like the farming system in Stardew Valley has a lot more intricacies that make it really fun. And even if you are starting to get a little bit bored of Stardew Valley, it has an incredible modding community. Stardew Valley is one of the most easily moddable games. There are so many fun mods. If you're ever getting a little bit bored of it, I know not everybody plays it on PC, so not everybody really has access to mods, but if you do, then I think it makes it such a more fun experience. And I feel like that's what gives it replayability value. And I say the game is actually relatively cheap. I'm popping Stardew Valley as a must buy. So next up, we're looking at Evil Genius 2. Again, this is one that's not really well known. The first ever Evil Genius game, some of you might have heard of it. So it kind of works in a similar way to games like 2 Point Hospital, I guess, but basically Essentially, you take control of an evil genius and you set their plans for world domination by building them a lair. It's one of the more strategy focused simulation games. It's basically focused around like building up your evil base, but just with an over stereotypical comical evil style. The first Evil Genius game, I would say, is incredibly fun. I had a lot of fun playing that game as a child, but unfortunately the second game in the franchise didn't really perform that well. It has a very strange and clunky interface. The game simply doesn't have enough content to make it creative enough to feel like you can do what you want to do, and the strategy elements don't really have that much strategy to them. I feel like it dips into the simulation experience by giving you a quirky skin, in other words being an evil genius to work with, but it doesn't really go far enough in terms of making it a full-on clean experience. And it's a shame because I really loved the first game so much when I was a child, and when I got the second game I was so excited. I was like, this is going to be amazing, and I played it and I was like, oh my god, this is horrific. And that is why I am sorry, Evil Genius 2, but you are going in the horrific category. On the subject of horrific, Rollercoaster Tycoon World. I think it's safe to say Rollercoaster Tycoon World is one of the biggest simulation video gaming disasters of all time. I feel like the game made money because it stood on a name, Rollercoaster Tycoon, that had a lot of previous good reputation. It's only when Rollercoaster Tycoon World was released that everybody started hating on it, and that's just because it was a very bad game. Graphically, it was ugly. The UI was extremely unintuitive and ugly. The game is incredibly glitchy, like severely glitchy, and it didn't really expand on anything that was released in the previous main title game, Rollercoaster Tycoon 3. In fact, Rollercoaster Tycoon World, the fourth game, is actually factually worse than the third game, and that's not a good look. And I think the most disappointing thing of it all is that it has harnessed such an incredible reputation among gamers over many years, and we all hold so many nostalgic memories of playing Rollercoaster Tycoon. It's just that I don't know what happened with the developers of Rollercoaster Tycoon World. I don't know what went wrong in their work culture, but something went very, very wrong in the development of the game, which is why it's such a horrific mess. I do feel sad putting it in the horrific category because it could have been so much more. Okay, taking a look at Story of Seasons, looking at Pioneers of Olive Town, which is the latest released Story of Seasons game, it's definitely a lot more light-hearted compared to the other popular farming simulation game, Stardew Valley, and definitely has more of a childish look to it. Obviously, it's 3D graphics, although it's not that beautiful considered that it was only released last year. I feel like it should have looked a little bit better graphically. The game tried to innovate from before. For example, it introduced a museum mode, which obviously takes inspiration from Animal Crossing, but it wasn't really implemented that well. The game tried to mix it up by making it more about like tourism, so the game is all about like trying to bring tourists into the town. I think it's a really fun concept. I just don't think it was really implemented that well. It feels like a low budget indie game, and Story of Seasons or Harvest Moon never used to be like a low budget indie game. It was always quite a niche game, but it never really had that like low budget vibe to it, whereas Story of Seasons does, and it's disappointing because it lacks anything remarkable or quirky. I would say actually the previous game, Friends of Mineral Town, is probably a lot better, but even then I feel like the game was only really popular for nostalgia's sake because everybody loved the original Harvest Moon Mineral Town game. It just doesn't really do that much to innovate, and instead tries to play off the cute aesthetic without ever really being a good game. I do really miss old Harvest Moon. I think the new Story of Seasons remakes that they're doing are not really that. I'm not saying they're horrific, but I would say they're not great. Like, I did feel bored playing the game, so it's going and boring. So taking a look at The Sims 4, 99% of videos on my channel are me playing The Sims 4, so I probably have the most knowledge about this one. The Sims 4 is probably the most negatively reviewed, well, it is the most negatively reviewed Sims game. And it's funny because The Sims 4 has innovated on the Sims series in a lot of ways. A lot of features that were quite surface level in previous Sims games have become much more refined with the Sims 4 DLC packs, which is a good thing and a curse at the same time because there are so many packs that it's literally so expensive to have the full experience. Yet they go into different concepts in a lot of detail, and it means you do have the creative freedom to basically do anything that you want. I think the issue where The Sims 4 falls short is that the actual base game itself, the platform itself was built on a rocky platform, and that's why fundamentally I think a lot of people have a hard time playing it when they've enjoyed previous Sims games and they know how previous Sims games are really fun, especially when you look at games like The Sims 3, which are honestly just so open and incredible. If we had Sims 3 on this list, I would have put it on a must buy. I haven't included it in this list, by the way, because EA are kind of discontinuing the game. Like, it's not really showing up on the EA Play Store anymore with all of the DLC. They're slowly trying to get rid of it. Many people said they want a Sims game which has Sims 2 stories, Sims 3 open world, and Sims 4 graphics. And that's because The Sims 4, I'd say, is a graphically very nice game to look at, and it's got a really nice build mode. Like, if you just enjoy building houses or building things in general, like The Sims 4 is literally like the best game to do that right now. Even if you don't like life simulation gaming, I think it's fun. It's personally what I like to do when I play in The Sims 4 in my free time. I just like rebuilding the entire world. That's literally the only thing I do. Sometimes I do enjoy messing around with the different gameplay mechanics. I quite like the careers packs where you have different careers that you can do. I love running and opening my own shop in the game as well. I find that quite fun. And I feel like the current Sims 4 developers don't really have that much appreciation for the older games in the series. They're constantly trying to wokeify The Sims 4, making it appeal to the Gen Z audience by making it very, very left-wing and very, very woke. And I feel like a lot of players don't like it. As I mentioned before, simulation games have never really been for kids. They've always appealed to an older audience. And it's these ones that do try and appeal to a slightly older audience that always do best. Yeah, I feel like with The Sims 4, they just regressed so much with it. And it does feel very cheesy and cringy and surface level. The game is all about being who you want to be, doing what you want to do, but it just doesn't really have that much gameplay or ambition. But I do admit that it is a fun game to play. I mean, my entire channel has been built around playing The Sims 4, and as I said before, I do say it is fun to mess around with, and the game is literally free now for the base game, and it does have a lot of different facets to it, especially the build mode is really fun, so I am going to put it in fun, but I wouldn't say it's a must. Next up we have Dreamlight Valley, which is a relatively new game. This is Disney's entry into the simulation gaming genre. I actually recently got back into this game. I played it for a bit when it first came out, and then I stopped playing it, and now I started playing it again. I feel like as they've expanded on it, it's got a little bit better. Obviously right now it's not technically in its final release state. The actual final game is supposed to be free. It's just in like a paid for beta state now, I guess, and as such it is very glitchy, but I won't complain about that because they literally said it is a beta game. It does just feel like a regular old Animal Crossing style simulation game, but with a Disney skin on it. I think the biggest issue for me is that it feels like a mobile app game, and the game is being made by a mobile app developer, so there's no surprise there. And in that sense, it does feel a little bit underwhelming at times, like you're just fulfilling all of these different objectives in this mobile app style. It has a mobile app style currency system. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's not like totally cash grabby now in that it has loads of different microcurrencies that you've got to buy, although as the game is in pre-release state, we don't know that as of yet. Maybe they'll introduce it in the future, but for what it's worth, I do think it is a little bit of fun. I quite like Disney movies, so I think it's fun introducing all the different Disney characters into the game. And I will say it is quite a pretty game, and I like the building elements of it. Like, it's literally so open, you can literally place anything anywhere, and in that sense I do feel like it expands on games like Animal Crossing by giving you the creative freedom to literally build anything anywhere and do anything your own way, which is honestly incredible. I do feel like it misses some gameplay elements in terms of, like, you know, in Animal Crossing you have the museum in order to do different collectibles. There's a similar thing in Stardew Valley with like the Jojo Mart versus Community Center storyline. Dreamlight Valley does obviously have an overarching storyline element to it, in that you're trying to get rid of all of these like horrible evil vines growing everywhere, and that's a really nice touch to the game, but I feel like it just needs something extra to make it feel like a really fun, captivating Disney experience, because right now it just feels like every other simulation game that's trying to copy Animal Crossing. It doesn't really feel like it has a unique thing other than the fact that it has a Disney skin on it. I really hope as they develop it through beta, they just give it that something extra to give it an oomph, but right now it just doesn't have it. But I will admit it is fun, so I'm just popping it in the fun category for now, but I think it has the potential to be a must buy, but just not yet. Looking at now 2 Point Hospital and 2 Point Campus, we'll start with 2 Point Hospital. 2 Point Hospital Hospital actually reminded me a lot of the old school, more kind of strategy building simulation games. It reminded me a lot of those games like Hotel Giant, if anybody remembers playing that, or there was like Hospital Tycoon. The game itself is very simplistic, like it's not the most beautiful game in the world, and it's also not the most complicated game in the world in terms of strategy, and I think it's one of those simulation games that's just fun to mess around with, and I think that's why it has a lot of charm, and I think it has a really nice quirky humor too. I actually laughed, like physically laughed, when I played the game with some of the funny things that happen in there. It's definitely more quirky than realistic, but it doesn't do it in a way that feels childish. It does it in a way that feels kind of, I don't know, sarcastic in a way, and that's why I like it. But if you had a limited budget and you wanted a creative style simulation building game, it wouldn't be the one that I'd say you must get, and I wouldn't say it's the most fun out of all the other ones in this list too, so I will just say if you must. Next up, obviously we have 2 Point Campus. It's basically the same thing as 2 Point Hospital, but it's on a university campus instead of in a hospital. Although I like that they did try and innovate on it and not just make it another 2 Point Hospital game but with a different skin on it. They did actually expand on it, and one of the biggest way they expanded on it is by allowing you to actually build the campus itself, because in 2 Point Hospital you couldn't really change the hospital buildings, you were stuck with how they looked, whereas in 2 Point Campus you're not stuck with how it looks, you actually have the ability to change it up, and that's one thing that I do really appreciate about it. And it still has all of the same sarcastic quirky humor, it just has a lot more creative freedoms to place things where you want and do what you want, and I feel like they took into account a lot of the criticisms of 2 Point Hospital, and that's something I can really appreciate. So I will say 2 Point Campus is fun, a little bit above 2 Point Hospital. I know I've missed a lot of other games, these are just all of the games that I've played myself. If you do have any recommendations for me, by the way, what are your like fun and must-buy simulation games, ones that I have not mentioned yet, because I'm always willing to give new ones a go. If you enjoyed this video, you might also enjoy this video here. Thank you so much for watching, see you in the next one.